In this video, we're going to be talking about, should you purchase a rental property out of state as a long-term hold? What are the pros, what are the cons, and some miscellaneous things that you should be thinking about along the way. You're thinking of purchasing a property out of state. You're a seasoned investor, maybe even a young investor, and you're wondering about all the pros and cons. Well, let's start with some of the pros. One of the pros may be, depending on where you live, purchasing out of state would be more financially feasible for you. Let's just use California as an example. We all know that California has some super high price points right now. So you may be living in California wanting to get your toes wet in the real estate market, but just not being able to physically do it because it just requires too much money. Whereas you look on the East Coast and you're seeing all kinds of properties that are for sale in a price point that's budget friendly to you, that's doable for you. That's one of the biggest reasons why any investor, seasoned or not, is looking out of state. Another pro with this being that your current market may just be too saturated. Let's use Las Vegas, Nevada for an example. Las Vegas, Nevada isn't a huge city, and we actually have a lot of investors here. So when a market is really hot and there's a lot of money out there, sometimes it's just too saturated for that first-time investor to get their toes wet because the big dogs, so to speak, come in and kind of pile drive you over. So again, hopping out of state into a market that may not be so saturated would benefit you. Another reason why you may want to look out of state. Last but not least, one of the things that I truly enjoy doing, and I hope that you do too, and just as a thought process in general, is diversification. So diversifying your portfolio when it comes to real estate is always going to be a benefit to you. During the COVID crisis, like March 2020, I had a few Airbnbs in a couple different states, and there were some states that shut down faster than others. And by diversifying, I was able to utilize the income on one property to cover the income on other properties. That's just one really quick example, but diversifying any kind of portfolio, whether you're in stocks and bonds and things like that, is always something that's a positive. It's a great thing to do. I think that most investors, if you talk to them on the real estate side of the house, they have property not only where they're physically located. If you have a conversation with them long enough, I am sure that they are diversified out of state, maybe even out of country. We've talked about some pros with purchasing out of state. Now let's flip over and talk about some of the cons, the things that you should really be thinking about. One of them being, if you're purchasing in a different state, you're not going to be knowledgeable of the area. You're just probably not. Unless you know somebody there, mom, dad, uncle, aunt, whatever, you're not going to know the area. And one of the biggest things that you need to think about is type or class of renter that may be renting that property down the line. Most investors will use a term Class A, B, C, D, and F neighborhoods, with most people not wanting to purchase in a D or F neighborhood. And I think it's probably self-explanatory, but when you're purchasing in a D or F neighborhood, what tends to happen? A lot of overhead, a lot of damage to a property, and a lot of turnover. Every single time a property turns over, that's gonna eat out of your profit margin. So you really need to do some research in the areas that you're trying to purchase in, even if that means taking a drive or getting on a plane and making yourself more knowledgeable about the area. A good little tip or hack, if you will, is to research your school districts. A lot of people take a moment to research your school district. If the schools are rated 1 out of 5, that's probably gonna be more of that D or F neighborhood versus a 3 out of 5, which may be more like a B or C type neighborhood. Another con being lower profit margins. If you're purchasing at a lower purchase price because that's more comfortable to you, just realize that your profit margins will probably be decreased as well. If you're not purchasing the $800,000 oceanfront property, but you're purchasing a small little single-story home on the East Coast for $100,000, it may not be as big of a profit margin. Not to mention, you also are gonna have other costs associated with that property, such as property management fees, somebody actually taking care of your property, more handymen, and without being in the same state, a lot of times that tends to just cost you a little bit more money. My third con being overhead costs and different overhead costs, things that maybe you're not thinking about sitting from your perspective. So let's use some examples. I'm sitting in California. Beautiful weather. I don't really get a lot of snow. Obviously depends on where you're at. I'm thinking more coast. I guess I want to be on the beach, but yeah, we're thinking more coast. So I'm sitting on the coast. I'm not really thinking about snow removal or roofs needing to be repaired or replaced or trees that can fall over when they're too close to my property, because that's not something that I physically deal with day in and day out from my perspective from where I live. So once you start researching out of state, you really need to think about overhead costs that may affect that property in that state because it's so different from where you live. We've discussed some of the pros and the cons, and so now let's make this a reality. So we've juggled all the pros and cons, and now I actually want to do it. What's the next step? I live somewhere, I want to purchase out of state. The first step is probably going to be interviewing a management company, because you're probably not going to be managing it from out of state. And that is a huge key word here. Interview the property manager. Make sure you're calling a few. And I have done some research and actually watched a lot of YouTubes on examples that people will give in terms of questions that you need to be asking that property manager. So first and foremost being, are you invested in real estate? I love that question when talking to a property manager. I don't want anybody managing my properties if they're not physically invested in real estate. So, hi, my name is so-and-so, great to meet you. Are you invested in real estate? May I ask what your portfolio looks like, etc. It's so important to surround yourself and your company, your business, and even your property manager with somebody that's like-minded and also investing in real estate like you. So that's probably one of the biggest questions you want to ask. Second being, how many properties are you managing? There's a fine line between having a nice portfolio to manage and having too many. Too many is not good for you. So what is too many? I think on average, I would like a property manager probably looking at about 200 to 300 properties. If they've got 400 plus properties that they're managing, they may be tapped out. And if they do have that many properties in their portfolio, how many people do they have working for them? What's their communication going to look like? Are they going to be emailing primarily, phone call, texting? How are we actually going to do this? Now the costs. Now that you have interviewed a property management company, you found somebody that's going to have good communication, etc. Of course, the next question is going to be, what is the cost going to be? Normally, we're somewhere between that 8 to 10% range. And just realize that once you start a relationship with somebody, and if you build a portfolio, down the road, you may be able to come back and negotiate those type of costs depending on how many properties you hold with them. So at one point in time, let's say you own one, they may charge you 10%. Now you own 5, you may be able to renegotiate those fees down to 8%, et cetera, et cetera. As you own more, then continuously reevaluate those numbers. Maybe you can even get them down to 7%, but really rough numbers off the bat, off the cuff, you should know is about 8 to 10% in property management fees. So the question today being, should you purchase a rental property out of state? We've talked about the pros, the cons, the management side of the house, and if you're looking for an answer on that, from my perspective, I would say yes. I myself am, in fact, investing in multiple states, California, Utah, Ohio, Las Vegas, Nevada, looking at purchasing at a few other states as well, all for different reasons. And I'm having to run those exact same pros and cons. So most real estate investors, if you ever have a chance to chat with them, are in fact diversified in multiple states and even sometimes out of country. So yes, I do think that you should be considering it. If you found this video useful, please subscribe, like, comment, ask me all the questions. I would love to know your thoughts. And if you have any additional questions, I'll be sure to answer them. Thanks for watching.